welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Katharine, and in today's video I'm going to be comparing two types of books. One being books that I thought that I would have loved but actually didn't, versus books that I didn't expect too much from and actually loved. So there's 3 books in each category, so let's just get into this. The first category that I'm going to be talking about today is the books that I thought I would have loved but actually didn't, and the first book in this category is The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. And essentially this is the first book that I discovered on the online book community on BookTok, and this girl in this video on TikTok, or shall I say BookTok, so it's the TikTok community of people who love books, and on this BookTok video this girl was describing The Honeymooners as if it was her own life, and she was like, oh yes, I was the maid of honor in my sister's wedding, and everyone at the wedding got food poisoning except for me and the best man. So because the honeymoon was already paid for, me and the best man just pretended to be the bride and groom and went on this honeymoon together, because of course the bride and groom was sick with food poisoning and they couldn't go and it was non-refundable. So the best man and the maid of honor just went, and she was like, yeah, I went on this honeymoon with the best man and we pretended to be the newly married couple, and it takes place in Hawaii. And this girl was like describing as if it was her own life, and that's the way in which it pulled me in. And at the end of the video she was like, haha, just kidding, this isn't actually my life, this is actually the book about The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. Go check it out, go read it. And then I read it, and the premise of the book sounds really fun, okay? Don't get me wrong, like that's what initially drew me into the book, because I was like, oh cool, like it's about a wedding. I studied event management in college, so of course I love weddings. I've worked weddings before as an event planner, so I was like, cool, this is like kind of in the realm that I'm interested in, so might as well just read this. And the whole premise of the book of like people getting food poisoning and not being able to go on the honeymoon, and her and the best man both go on the honeymoon together and pretend to be married, like it all sounded good, like the premise of it sounded good. But at the end of the book I was so disappointed, because first of all, it's very fluffy. Don't get me wrong, like it was an easy read, like a lot of the concepts were understandable and it was very surface level, but that's what I had a problem with it, is because it was so surface level, it was just very fluffy. There wasn't really a lot of deep meaning to the book at all. There was also miscommunication in this book, which I never like in any books. Like, can you just like talk to each other? And the only reason why I would ever like miscommunication is if they resolved it in a good way, and they did not resolve it in a good way, like whatsoever. And then there's also cheating in this book as well, which is another thing that I don't like in books whatsoever. And this is something that just like totally put a bitter taste in my mouth with the book. If you like it, I'm not judging you, but like it was just not a book for me. The second book that I thought I was going to love but actually didn't was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, or any Colleen Hoover book, to be honest. But I'm specifically going to talk about It Ends With Us by her because it's probably her most popular book, and they just came out with a movie about it. But essentially what this is about is this girl named Lily Bloom. Haha, it's pretty ironic because of what the rest of the book is about. So she's a florist, okay? She's a florist named Lily Bloom, okay? That's already cringy, okay? But this takes place in Boston, actually, and I am from the Boston area. I don't live in Boston, the city, but I live just outside of it. So that was something that really interested me about the book. But apart from that, it just got like a lot of hype and it's very popular still. Of course, there was a movie made about it, so of course it's a popular book. It has to be a popular book in order for there to be a movie adaptation about it. But basically, it follows this girl named Lily Bloom, who's a florist, and she grows up in a home where her father is really abusive, but then she ends up getting into an abusive relationship like later on in her life as she's an adult, and it's just about that whole situation. And I personally just don't like Colleen Hoover's books in general for the reason that she really glorifies toxic relationships, and I have been in toxic relationships before, okay? I dated someone who had a heroin addiction, okay? And I understand that there's always like this inward battle of like, do I stay with them? Do I not stay with them? Because like, you sometimes think like in that moment when you're with them that you have to stay with them because you think that by staying with them it's somehow going to help them like get out of their like addiction or somehow not treat you badly anymore. But like at the end of the day, like the best thing for you to do in those situations is to leave, to protect yourself, and tough love for them as well. Like putting those boundaries up and saying like, no, this is not how you're supposed to act or treat me. Like you need to go get help. And that's probably the most loving thing that you can do as someone who's in a relationship with someone who has domestic violence issues or an addiction. And I understand that like Lily Bloom had those types of thoughts in her head of like, do I stay with this guy or do I not? Because she was in a domestic violence situation. But like in the book, I feel like it kind of glorified that a little bit too much. It almost made it seem like it was okay for him to be abusing her, and like I just didn't appreciate that. And that's just not in this book in particular by Colleen Hoover, but I've read a few other Colleen Hoover books and they did practically the same thing. It was almost making excuses for the abuse, and I didn't appreciate that at all. So that's the reason why I didn't like that book, and I thought I was gonna like it in the first place because it is so popular and it does have a movie adaptation. But like at the end of the book I was just like, this is not good at all. But anyway, the third book that I'm gonna talk about that is some book that I thought I was gonna like but actually ended up not liking, and that is Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren, another Christina Lauren book on this list. And I decided to give Christina Lauren another chance. I did read The Unhoneymooners by her, so I wanted to read a second book by her just to see if that it was true that I didn't like what her writing style was or her books. And basically this was about these two kids essentially. They met in like middle school and high school, and they grow up together and they fall in love, and then it's a dual timeline, so they follow the kids as they grow up and fall in love, and then there's this other timeline like 10 years later and they hadn't talked in like forever, and they had been like no contact for like 10 years, so they're like in their late 20s at that point. And it just, at the end of the book, like the reasoning why they didn't talk for 10 years was kind of ridiculous to me. Like again, like miscommunication, like I'm not a big miscommunication type person when it comes to books, especially when the miscommunication could have just literally been easily solved if you just like literally talked. And yeah, that's literally all I can say about the book, because like Christina Lauren, I just don't think I'm gonna read any more of her books just because of the fact that literally it seems like a theme that she likes miscommunication in books. Also, I felt really icked out by the fact that I was reading a book about high schoolers and there was like sexual content in it. If I'm not mistaken, Love and Other Words is categorized as a young adult book, if I'm not wrong in saying that. And I just felt like with the sexual content that was in there, like why is that in a book for young adult, like children? Young adult literally means for adolescents, like teenagers, like kids in high school. And I just don't think those types of things should be in books. And I also have nieces and nephews who are teenagers, and I didn't like reading about like the relationships, like the relationship going ons, I should say, of the relationship, because I was like, you know what, this is weird for me to be reading about like the sexual nature of this relationship when my nieces and nephews are literally this age. If I didn't want to really know that stuff about my nieces and nephews, like why would I want to read it about these characters in a book? But yeah, that's the reason why I didn't like the Love in Other Words book by Christina Lauren. There are many other books that I could talk about that I was really disappointed with, especially in this past like year and a half. I just don't really read a lot of mainstream secular books anymore that are recommended on like a popular level. I read a lot of Christian fiction now, and if I listed all the books that I was disappointed in that I thought I was gonna love, this whole video would be hours long, so I'm not gonna do that. That's why I limited myself to 3 books to talk about here. But let's get into the next category of books that I didn't have high expectations for, but I actually ended up loving. I'm going to talk about the first book here. It's called Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon. And when I tell you I had never heard of Amy Harmon before in my life up until I read this book, I literally never heard a singular person on Book Talk, Bookstagram, or BookTube talk about Amy Harmon. Unless like I completely missed like someone talking about it and they just like glanced over it and rushed talking about it. Like I honestly don't remember ever hearing about Amy Harmon as an author before the point in which I read this book, if that makes sense. I read Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon back in October of 2024, and I kid you not, that was my favorite book of the year. It was a 6-star read. I didn't expect too much from the book just because, first of all, I had never heard of Amy Harmon before, so I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And secondly, I was reading it for a book club, and it was for a friend of mine from church, her mom's book club. And mind you, this book club that her mom hosts is literally just like my friend from church who is like around my age, and then all of her mom's friends who are like in their 60s. So I was kind of expecting this book to be like a very cheesy book, to be honest, like kind of an old grandma type book, similar to maybe like a Debbie Macomber book, or like a book that you would just see at a thrift store that no one wants to read, if that makes sense. So I didn't really have high expectations for this book, but boy oh boy was I wrong, because it was my favorite book of the year in 2024, and it was a 6-star read for me, and I just really love that book with all my heart. It's definitely something that has propelled me into wanting to read more Amy Harmon books, but I have yet to yet. I definitely want to read more books on her backlist, and I can't wait to do that in the near future. Hopefully I'll have some reading wrap-ups of me talking about more Amy Harmon books, because I can already tell that she's probably going to be one of my favorite authors of all time. I think it's a little bit too early for me to talk about her being my favorite author, because I've only read one book by her, and I want to give her a couple more chances in order for me to actually claim that she's one of my favorite authors of all time. I like to give authors like 2 or 3 chances before I either A, scrap them and not read any more of their books, or B, call them my favorite author. So I definitely want to read more Amy Harmon books in the near future, so keep an eye out for that in some of my reading wrap-ups. But the second book I want to talk about that surprised me and I didn't expect to like so much was Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. Yet again, another favorite book of mine of literal all time, just because of the fact that I had never read Christian fiction before this point, before I read this book, if that makes sense. I had never read a Christian fiction book before reading Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers, and it was such a surprise to me because, first of all, it's a chunker. I think it's like around 500 pages if I'm not mistaken, and it's essentially a loose retelling of the book of Hosea in the Bible, and it's about this young girl named Sarah, and she's sold into sex trafficking as a child, and quickly her name is changed from Sarah to Angel, and then at the age of 18, so 10 years after, she's sold into sex trafficking as a prostitute. So she's sold into sex trafficking at 8 years old. 10 years later, she's 18, and she is actually saved out of that lifestyle when Michael Hosea marries her, and she just marries him basically out of the convenience of trying to get out of prostitution. And this is actually historical, so it's based in the 1850s, 1860s in California during like the gold rush era, if that makes sense. And essentially she moves in with him, and she doesn't really like enjoy being around him because he is a Christian and she is not, and he basically just teaches her like the love of God and what it truly means to be a Christian and everything like that. And she runs away a few times because she's like really scared of like what it truly means to be loved and to love, if that makes sense, because she's basically just become numb to every sort of emotion after being a prostitute for so long. And it's just such a beautiful story of like God's love for us as, you know, children of God, as Christians, you know, and it is essentially redeeming love, like God's redeeming love, and that's why the book is called Redeeming Love. And I just really love Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and it really surprised me because I had not read Christian fiction before that point in time, and I then wanted to read more Christian fiction in the future, so that's the reason why that surprised me, and I ended up actually loving it. The third book that I actually want to mention that surprised me was Marley and Me by John Grogan, and I'm not a big nonfiction reader, and this technically is considered a nonfiction book, but it's written in such a way that it doesn't feel like a nonfiction book. It literally just feels like a story. And that's why I was so surprised by it, because I was like, you know what? I was gifted it like when I was like probably in middle school, and I think I got it for my birthday one year from like a friend. She's like, you have to read this, and I was like, it's a book about a dog. Like, I grew up with dogs, don't get me wrong, I love dogs, and I always considered myself a dog person, but like I was like, do I really want to read a book about a dog? Like, that just seems really boring to me. I knew there was a movie about it, but I was like, I was still indifferent to it. But the thing was, is I read it actually, and I don't think I put it down. Like, I literally remember reading it so fast. And then I watched the movie, and I cried during the movie and also during the book. I don't think I cried so hard during a book or a movie ever in my life since that time. Like, I absolutely love the book and I love the movie. It is sad. I do have to warn you, if you do read the book or watch the movie, you will be bawling your eyes out, especially if you are a dog person or you own a dog. You understand the struggles of like what it is to own a dog, because they truly feel like they're a part of your family. So they go through the ups and downs of your family, and of course, like, dogs don't live forever. So that's all I'm gonna tell you guys about that book. But yeah, those were the 3 books that I was not expecting too much from, but I actually ended up loving, and I just appreciate you guys watching this video. I hope this was entertaining for you. I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you watched this up until this point, please leave the book stack emoji down below. And if you have any books that you read that were either something that you thought you were gonna love and were disappointed by, or the other way around, where the book was something that you were kind of not expecting too much fun from, but like you ended up actually loving, please let me know in the comments down below, because I would love to look at them and see what I can read next. But do all the YouTube things that you know how to do, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!